Hey guys, welcome back. A couple of days ago, Dale, the owner of Nitehawk Airsoft out in Ford, Washington, dropped off a handful of airsoft guns for me to work on. Now these are raffle guns and rental guns and all kinds of things. But one of them was a real treat and actually a bit of a nostalgia trip to check out. It was a Classic Army M15A4. It's a full stock with a 14.5-inch barrel and a quad rail on it. And dang, it was really neat to see. You don't see those very often anymore, especially in brand new, well, not brand new, but at least unopened, but pretty well used condition. It still uses the old Armalite logo on it, and the upper receiver still had the two pins that hold it in place. It's really skinny, like couple millimeter pins that hold it to the lower receiver. Really old design. The second airsoft gun I ever owned was a Classic Army M15A4, so this is a lot of nostalgia actually opening this up, so really a treat for me. But I have the gun apart and I just wanted to talk about the internals and just kind of see where these were at, 12 to 15 years ago, and see where airsoft guns are at now and kind of compare. Obviously this thing's not been opened up in a long time, so it's going to be really probably some pretty dry grease in there, which I'm really curious to see. When I started airsofting, there were kind of three brands you went to: Classic Army, ICS, and Toki Marui. And not too long after, Echo One kind of peeked its head up, and they weren't that great at the time, but they improved quite a bit over time, obviously. The Classic Army models were kind of the go-to guns for upgrading at the time because they had metal spring guides, decent quality gears, and I'll talk about that when we get into the gearbox here. Hop-up chamber was already metal. It came with a 6.08 brass inner barrel, real brass. And these weren't even crowned, they're just straight cut. So things have changed quite a lot. And these were okay. They'd lift a 0.2 or 0.25. This barrel is super dirty, so I'll have to clean it. But they came with a metal hop-up. They didn't adjust super well. They were a little picky, I suppose. At the time, Classic Army called this their high torque, high performance motor. I would call it neither, especially by today's motor standards. There's very little torque when you actually rotate the axle on it. And at the time, these were fine motors. They'd pull the M90-ish spring that was in these gearboxes without a problem. And if you wanted to hook up like a 9.6 volt or nowadays an 11.1 volt battery on these motors, they'd get a pretty high rate of fire, like low 20s, upper teens. At the time, radius in your gearbox wasn't really a thing. And so you can see there's really tiny radius cuts on the front of the cylinder window there. They're minor, but they're there. And I think Classic Army was probably one of the few, if not the only ones at the time to be doing this. Their gearboxes generally came with metal spring guides. They didn't have any kind of bearings on there, but metal is always going to be more durable than the plastic ones, which have had break all the time. Comes with a pretty soft spring. This one is about an M100, give or take, so this would probably get you like 330 to 350 FPS, give or take. And it's got all kinds of white grease all over it, which is, after all this time, very sticky and gunky. Now, I'm not sure that checking the air seal on this is going to be fair after all this time because of the grease quality, but I suppose it's worth a shot. It's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. I've seen gearboxes that get no air seal that are brand new, and at least this gets at least a fair amount of one for parts that are really simple. Tappet plate is nothing to write home about. Nozzle, plastic with no O-ring. Piston is the version that attaches from the front and just basically drills into a metal washer in the back, so really simple design. Second to last tooth isn't removed, but these still have speed cuts, which at the time was not a very common thing. Cylinder head, single O-ring, rubber damper, and cylinder type 2 brass. Really basic stuff, but it worked well at the time and is still considered, I think, pretty decent by today's standards. Nowadays you get a lot of aluminum cylinders and aluminum this and that, whereas brass and copper, I think, are still superior. And they may cost more, which is probably the case, but they're definitely better in my opinion. The shimming on these old Classic Armies is still pretty decent, and even by today's standards is not bad at all. I'd be happy running this stock. It sounds pretty good. It's not a whole lot of movement on the axles. For what these were at the time, these were fantastic. The only, well, I guess the biggest downside for me was if I could get this apart again, my gosh, there we go. The biggest downside for me at the time was the wire harness. These are not great. Even at the time, they were pretty poor. The wiring quality is good. Obviously, you can see this one's been well used, and I need to replace or repair that. But the trigger switches themselves, I'm not a big fan of. If I'm not mistaken, these are copper contacts, and these really did not last very long at all. They were pretty poor quality, and I remember when I had my Classic Army, you know, I was pretty new. I didn't know a whole lot. I think I swapped this out at least twice over probably a year, just from regular 9.6 volt or large 8.4 volt usage. They just didn't last, and they collected crud pretty quickly, and they weren't great quality. You know, these probably cost $300 for an airsoft gun, full metal, with this gearbox in it back in the day. And nowadays, for something like this, you'd probably be looking at $350, $400 for something similar, which is crazy. So, yeah, things have changed quite a bit, but you know, even after all these years, I still love these Classic Army gearboxes, and they're solid by today's standards with a handful of upgrades and some tuning. They're still pretty awesome, even today. Thanks for watching, guys, and thanks for taking this trip down memory lane for me. I'll catch you next time.